So I wanted us to start with a bit of an introduction. If you could just tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and how you came to Krishna consciousness.
Well, I back in the late 1960s, I was living as a hippie down on the Lower East Side, not very far from 26 Second Avenue. And a friend of mine in college, I was going to City College, a new division that opened up on Staten Island, one of the boroughs of New York. And so they asked me that, you live near these people. I just heard about them. They into yoga and meditation. Can you get me some information about them? And so I stopped by. It was only several blocks from where I lived in the East Village. I was in Alphabet City. And so I got that information for my friend, but I wasn't personally interested so much. But then I was doing something for my theater project. We were getting together in our theater project in college. We were getting together several short plays to present to the public schools in New York. We were doing this as a project together. And so I also worked in college at the college library, and I found a book. I had just been to the Hare Krishnas, the center on 26 Second Avenue, and in the library I found a book from India. And I didn't know if there was any connection between the Hare Krishnas and this book from India. It's all coming from the same source. And the book was stories and it was an old book. It was from like 1910, 1912. And one of the stories in the book was the story of Yudhisthira and how he befriends a dog on his journey into the Himalayan mountains, and how Yudhisthira, when he's offered entrance into heaven, he refuses to go without the dog. So King Indra, the king of heaven, is very, very astonished. So I worked this story that I found into a short play that was included. We had 4 different short plays that lasted for a little over an hour that we presented to kids in elementary schools. And so this story of Yudhisthira and the dog was one of those plays that was presented. And that was my basic introduction to Krishna consciousness and to just the importance of theater, community theater, and outreach. And so I felt very good about contributing to this, and I felt very good about pursuing theater as a livelihood. But then my wife and I, we met in college, and we met Srila Prabhupada in 1971, and it was a wonderful experience. In 1971, within a matter of a couple of months, we had several things going on. We got married, we started chanting japa, and then a couple of months later, we met Srila Prabhupada. And so this started giving us a redirection in our life, both of our lives. And eventually we moved to the Chicago Temple in 1973. And then we moved here to New Vrindavan in 1976. So we're still here in New Vrindavan. Our kids have grown up here. And over the years, I've been pursuing theater and several other things that we'll get into during the course of the interview, I imagine.
Wow, that's a very inspiring, what you say, journey. Just thinking about community theater and the primary schools and all of that. Could you tell me a bit more about that whole exercise or that whole exchange?
What
With
specifically are you asking?
community theater and how the play went, how it was received, if you can.
Well, it was received really well. Like I said, it was part one of four short plays that we did
Mhm,
for elementary school kids. And
mhm,
so we traveled around in Staten Island to some of the elementary schools and also in Manhattan to some of the elementary schools. And then for me, it was a very inspiring to see my little play in action, and also it gave me a new direction in life because I came to college with the intention of majoring in history and teaching history. And after we left the college, after we graduated, we moved up to Nova Scotia for about a year. And up in Nova Scotia, we took with us, of course, we visited devotees several times, and we took the new abridged Bhagavad Gita that the devotees had put out in the late 60s. We took that up to Nova Scotia with us. And just around that time in 1970, George Harrison came out with his album. um, it's a double album, but it had My Sweet Lord on it. And so we were very surprised that even George Harrison is into this chanting of Hare Krishna. And so at that time, we went to a hobby shop. In those days, you couldn't buy beads, but we went to a hobby shop and then we had to string our own beads. And we finally left Nova Scotia, and hitchhiking through Canada, we stopped in the Toronto temple, and the devotees there, they told us that just in a few days, Prabhupada's going to be arriving in Detroit. Why don't you wait for a few days? So I was invited to Madison, Wisconsin to perform with a theater company there. It was also like a regional theater company called the Broome Street Theater. It's still there today. And so when we met Prabhupada, it was very inspiring to see Prabhupada and to hear. We understood that this is a genuine holy person, a genuine saintly personality who is imparting knowledge that has been passed down for thousands and thousands of years. And so we were overwhelmed with that. And then after a couple of days, then we continued to Madison, Wisconsin, where I joined the theater, the Broome Street Theater. But after several years in Madison, and after the birth of our first child, our son, then we felt a burden, a responsibility. And actually, at that time, we still weren't initiated by Prabhupada. The only way in those days, the only way you can get initiated is to actually join the temple. If you didn't join the temple, there was no way of getting initiated by Prabhupada. And so then we joined the temple. We were inspired by some talks that devotees gave, and we joined the temple in the spring of 1973. Actually, we joined just a few days before the deities were installed in Chicago, Kishore Kishori. Last month or 2 months ago, I think it was the 50th anniversary of the installation of Kishore Kishori, and we joined at that time.
So, could you tell me a little bit about when you finally realized that the story that you found in the library, you realized what significance it has or it had in Krishna consciousness? What was your reaction? How did you feel?
Well, I wanted to go a little deeper into that, and I I started a theater project here in New Vrindavan in the late 1970s after I moved here. And one of the first plays we did was a play for Gaur Purnim about Lord Chaitanya. And then I started developing other things. One of the second plays was a solo performance called An Evening with Krishnadas Kaviraj. And then, of course, that was a solo performance where I played the elderly Krishnadas Kaviraj, entertaining the audience, so to speak, and talking about his work. I got the inspiration from seeing in New York City. I saw an evening with Mark Twain, who the performer was Hal Holbrook. He did a brilliant performance, a one-man show. I'd never seen a one-man show. And so I thought, seeing Hal Holbrook do Mark Twain, I thought, let me try to develop this piece, which I did. And then I didn't forget about the Mahabharata. I started a script on the Pandavas retire timely. That's a story. It's in the first canto about Yudhisthira and Bhima together. They're waiting for the arrival of Arjuna. Arjuna, they knew that something was going on in Dwarka, and they sent Arjuna to find out what was happening. And in the meantime, Yudhisthira and Bhima were seeing and experiencing all of these ill omens, the omens of just indicating that the universal time had changed, that now it was the cusp of the Kali Yuga. The weather was changing, so many various things were changing into something very ominous and very dangerous. And so they were seriously looking at this, and then they were wondering why isn't Arjuna returned yet? What's going on? And finally, of course, in the Pandavas retire timely, then Arjuna does return. And he tells them of what happened in Dwarka, that Krishna had left this world and the city of Dwarka was practically destroyed. And then what I included is because now Arjuna's back and they're all very distraught. And to gain composure, Arjuna remembers the teachings of Bhagavad Gita that Krishna had given to him. And so the story, the play transitions, it kind of is a flashback to the moment when Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. So the character of Yudhisthira transitions into Krishna. And now Arjuna, he's no longer speaking to Yudhisthira, but now he's speaking to Krishna. And Krishna imparts the wisdom of Bhagavad Gita, and Arjuna is reacting to everything that Krishna is saying. So this is another step into developing the Mahabharata as a full-length drama. And so that year, or maybe it was the following year, I went to India for the very first time. I think it was in 81, I imagine. And I was developing this play starting in the fall of 1980. And so when I went to India, I was still thinking about my performance as a Krishna Das Kaviraj, an elderly saintly personality. So to get a better grip of what an elderly saintly personality looks like, when I was in Vrindavan, I went to visit an elderly saintly personality, an Indian gentleman. I don't remember his name at all. I went to visit him and we talked, and I was telling him what I was doing with my Krishna Das Kaviraj play. And as the conversation continued, I also mentioned that I was writing a new script. about the some sections of the Mahabharata, especially the Pandavas retire timely, which is a a very important ingredient of the Mahabharata. And so he smiled and he said this to me before I left. He said, "You've been attracted to the Mahabharata. If you take the Mahabharata into your heart, it will never leave you." And I will always remember that from over the years.
Actually, I'm just thinking as you're speaking that there's no way of actually getting into the Mahabharata without living it in real time, or it becoming a part of your life all the way through. And that kind of speaks to the first question of and answers to your fascination and going deeper into it at that. So would you say that that was one of the pivotal moments or experiences that solidified your passion for it?
Of the Mahabharata?
Mm.
Yes, meeting with that gentleman. And of course, I spent earlier in 1979 into 1980, I spent a few months with the Vaikuntha players in New York City. This is the original theater people. Nanda Kishore, he passed away just recently, a few days ago. And also Lokamangala. Lokamangala and I, we made a special connection. And after they sold the building, this is the 55th Street building in New York City that Prabhupada visited in 1976 and told them never to sell it. But they just couldn't maintain the building properly. They didn't know how to, and they couldn't financially continue. And so the theater project collapsed in New York City, and they sold the building. And so basically, for several years, the Hare Krishna movement was floundering in New York City. But in the meantime, Lokamangala came to join me in New Vrindavan. And in 1981, also, the play, the Ramayana, I went to New York to work on the Ramayana with the devotees, because in that 55th Street building, there was like 150 seat theater on the third floor. And the Vaikuntha players, they were called GATE, Govinda's American Theater Ensemble. We performed like 4 days a week for audiences in the New York area and devotees that came to see the play. And so
wow.
Then after all that, the dust settled, then the players regrouped just for a couple of months in New Vrindavan, where the Ramayana was filmed. ISKCON television filmed the Ramayana in New Vrindavan. And Lokamangala, of course, he's very famous. He plays Ravana. So he was known throughout the movement as the character of Ravana. He was pretty well known. And so we developed a relationship for over 10 years. And he came to New Vrindavan and we performed together, and we took our play, various plays that we developed to temples and to festivals and also to the Hindu community. But then the next stage of the fascination and dedication to Mahabharata came. One thing I wanted to mention is that when we developed the play, The Pandavas Retire Timely, this is like in 1981 or 82, Lokamangala and I, we heard about a competition in New York City. And it was by professors at Columbia College, some Indian professors. And they put on the first, what is it called here? The first American Asian India Drama Festival. And it was performed at a auditorium at Columbia University. And we entered into that competition. There was about 7 or 8 different plays. They all were based on either they were Indian performers, Hindu performers, or Hindu subject matter. So we entered into the play, and we, with that, Pandavas Retired Timely, we won first prize. One of the judges, who was a professional actor himself, said that that our play was, every word was dripping with devotion. And so that was another big a big encouragement to continue with the Mahabharata. So now we have the story of Yudhisthira and the dog. We have the story of the Pandavas retire timely, that they're going to be giving up their position as rulers of the kingdom and going into the Himalayan mountains. And Arjuna, of course, is thinking about the Bhagavad Gita and remembering that pastime when Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita to him. But now, later on in 1987, at the beginning of 1987, I heard that Peter Brook was developing a Mahabharata drama himself. So Peter Brook is a very famous international director. He's from England. He directed the one of the principal theater groups in England, but then in the 1980s, he moved his whole operation to Paris, and he collected a international cast of 40 actors, and they developed and rehearsed the play for months and months. It was a 9-hour drama. Nobody had ever heard of like a 9-hour drama, and it's all about the Mahabharata. So when I heard that, and I was fascinated. I actually wrote a letter to Peter Brook, but I never got a reply. I was saying that, you know, I've been studying the Mahabharata myself. Is there any way I can help you in what you're doing? But I never got a reply. But then in early 1987, we found out that Peter Brook, he's on a tour around the world. And in the fall of 1987, he's spending 3 months performing the Mahabharata in New York City at a theater called the Brooklyn Academy of Music. So we were thinking, wow, this this is going to be a monumental event. For Peter Brook is famous, and especially amongst the theater crowd. And so I thought, well, let's develop the Mahabharata and rent a theater in New York City and perform the Mahabharata the same time he's there in New York. We'll perform our Mahabharata. And so we rehearsed and rehearsed. We were developing the script. Lokamangala and I, we were looking for other actors. But we understood that this is a long commitment. You know, to rehearse, we were taking, set aside 4 months to rehearse. And then we found a theater in New York City for 6 weeks. And then we were going to go on and tour outside of New York City. At that time, we found a theater just on 54th Street, only a block away from where the 55th Street Temple was located. It was just a block away. And at that time, we rented this theater for $1,000 a week. It was a monumental expense for us. And when we performed, after several weeks, I had been in touch with the New York Times, hoping that they would send a reviewer. And unfortunately, he didn't come in the first 2 or 3 weeks, but in the fourth or fifth week, then he came to review the play when it was almost, our run was almost over. And so he said of the play that It's performed by Hare Krishna devotees who are disciples of Srila Prabhupada. He mentioned that in the play. And after that, we were getting like packed audiences in the last week of the performance. And one Jewish gentleman that he passed away just recently. We had a lifelong friendship. And this Jewish gentleman, he is a Jewish storyteller. And he came to the play. And Lokamangala and I, what we would do is right after the play is over, we'd go to the lobby, and as people are leaving, then we would thank them for coming. And we would have conversations, and maybe we also might sell some books, Bhagavad Gita we had available. And this Jewish gentleman, he said to me that I read the review in the New York Times, and when they said that you are disciples of Prabhupada, I understood that this is the real Mahabharata, and Peter Brooks is the shadow Mahabharata. Because he was studying Prabhupada's books. He never left his religion, his Jewish religion. He was very faithful, but he saw the basic foundation of the Vaishnava, the Gaudiya Vaishnava movement was the same as it was a very mystical, devotional foundation to the Hasidim. And so he respected the devotees. He never left, but he was inspired by the writings and the teachings of Srila Prabhupada to become more devotional, but he never left the Jewish religion.
This goes back again to solidifying the point of actually living the Mahabharata. Now, accessing you'd say a non-devotee community, or balancing that accessibility and depth. Speaking to the Jewish gentleman, how have you presented your work, or how have you put that kind of energy into your work to balance the Mahabharata's authenticity and also preserving it at that and making it accessible to people who may not know what it is?
Well, after our stay in New York, we performed for 6 weeks. We couldn't afford to perform for 3 months. Peter Brook was sold out for 3 months, and we were fortunate to be able to go see his rendition of Mahabharata. Peter Brook said, a reporter asked him, can you compare the Mahabharata to Shakespeare? And Peter Brook says, you can't compare the Mahabharata to any one of Shakespeare's plays. You can only compare the Mahabharata to all of Shakespeare's plays. And so Peter Brook, even though he was a professional theater man, still he had some element of some connection, some feeling, and a deep respect for the Mahabharata. And we never met Peter Brook, but actually we went to see his play, and we found out that some of his people came to see our play as well. The New York Times, I don't think I mentioned, referred to our play as the other Mahabharata. Peter Brooks was the main Mahabharata. Ours was the other Mahabharata. And so we performed with the Mahabharata for 4 years, taking it around to yoga groups and conferences and temples and Krishna temples, and also just the Hindu temples. We performed for Sri Chinmoy and his group in Brooklyn, New York, and they loved it. After the play was over, Sri Chinmoy stood up. I don't know, are you familiar with Sri Chinmoy? He was a famous guru in the 60s and 70s. he had a lot of his disciples were connected with the UN. He was very well connected. And so Sri Chinmoy, he, after our play was over, he came up on stage and began glorifying Srila Prabhupada. And he said that Prabhupada is he's the guru of all of us. And so we were just taken aback with the impact that our play, he has a community. I imagine he passed away. That was over 30 years ago, but he has a community in Queens with about 400 disciples, and they were all at the performance. And he gave us a very nice donation, but he also said he was glorifying Prabhupada to us and to his 400 disciples. And he said that Prabhupada is actually the guru of all of us. So, we couldn't fathom the impact that our play was making. We just couldn't fathom it. A year later, we also, Swami Rama, which is, he was the founder of the Himalayan Institute in Pennsylvania, in eastern Pennsylvania. He had an ashram there. He also passed away. But Swami Rama was a very famous personality at the time as well. And he heard about our performance, and every year he had a big event at his ashram at the Himalayan Institute. And he invited us there to perform Mahabharata there. And so people were hearing about it. We got several invitations to go to colleges and various, I think it was there was one big college in Philadelphia. I forget it was just one major college there, and various colleges and conferences elsewhere. But it was hard to gauge. I mean, people really appreciated it, but the far-reaching impact, it was hard to gauge what the far-reaching impact of the Mahabharata was. And so go ahead.
As with most spiritual efforts, it's hard to gauge. I'm just thinking, while you're going through this theatrical journey, when does your book start? When do you start writing your book? Are you writing it as you're going along?
No. The thing about theater, it was very special. Peter Brook wrote a book called The Empty Space. So this is the unique thing about theater, and also about storytelling. The next part of my journey with the Mahabharata is through storytelling. And Peter Brook says, for a performer, you take an empty space and you make that empty space something mystical, something magical. It becomes a profound atmosphere where the performer and the audience are going on a journey together. And so for me, that was like a very important thing, to create this atmosphere. And then at the end of the play, everybody leaves and it goes back to an empty space. It's just an empty space now again. But because the audience and the actors get together, they make it something magical, something mystical. Maybe you might have that same experience with poetry and performing poetry. But this is the idea of the performer, that the performer begins with taking an empty space and creating something magical. And I want to interject also what Prabhupada said about performance, the performance art. He told the devotees early on in the 1970s that I have seen your Shakespeare. And there were two actors. He saw a Shakespearean play in India. And he said, I've seen your Shakespeare, there were two actors performing on a bare stage, and everyone was totally riveted, totally attentive. Everyone was listening. So this is, again, the bare stage. This is the empty space. Prabhupada also experienced that same mystical idea behind the empty space. And when we developed our play, this is, we took Prabhupada's words to heart, because like I was mentioning earlier, as we were developing the script, we were looking for other actors to join us. But the thing is, no one wanted to make a commitment for 1 or 2 or 3 years. And we wound up rewriting the play for 2 actors. It was just Lokamangala and myself. We performed as 2 actors and as storytellers, connecting the scenes. And there was also a friend, Deva Jagat Pate. His legal name is Dave Everett. He lives out in Arizona. He was a Bharatanatyam dancer, and he performed in the play. And also we had a fantastic musician. He played the bansuri flute, a slew of other flutes. He also played the keyboard, the tampura, the tablas. He was fantastic. And as with the Indian tradition, the musician and the performers, they perform together on stage. And so this is the basis of our Mahabharata drama that we toured with for 4 years. Of course, Deva, he had other commitments in New York City, and he couldn't come to the colleges with us. But Mahesh and Lokamangala and myself, we toured together for 4 years. But then Lokamangala moved out to the West Coast, and he was also invited. Somebody, I think, paid his way to go to India to do some directing and performing there in India. He spent maybe about a year there. So now we had lost Lokamangala, and Mahesh and I, we continued the performance. I rewrote the entire script as a one-man storytelling drama. And we took it to colleges. We took it to also to yoga groups and to conferences, just like we were doing the Mahabharata, but we just did it. And people were just flabbergasted, especially the Indian people who understand the extent of the Mahabharata. Yeah. We kind of did our whole presentation was like 40 minutes long. Our live drama maybe was about 1 hour and 15 minutes long. So I had to cut it in half and did a dramatic solo storytelling drama of the Mahabharata for several years. Mahesh and I worked together for a number of years after that. And then he also moved on. He left, he went to Hawaii. He's still there now with his wife. He's still playing flute. His wife is also an accomplished musician. She's performing on the harp. She's an excellent harpist. So his legal name is Manuel Roberto. He's originally from Spain. So we had a cast of 4 compared to Peter Brook with a cast of 40. And so we continued, Mahesh and I continued performing the Mahabharata. And finally he left, and I did some, by this time, after Lokamangala moved away, I became very much connected with the national storytelling community here in America. And they were having conferences every year. They were having events all over the United States. And then in 2006, I became a professional storyteller. not only telling Mahabharata, but my bread and butter was doing multicultural storytelling for kids in elementary schools. And one of the stories that I told was Yudhisthira and the dog.
And the dog.
So I was still very much connected with Yudhisthira and the dog, because that's what I started out with that back in college. And the kids love that story. That's one of the stories that I did in my multicultural venue. But after Mahesh left, then I was more and more connected with the national storytelling community. I became their representative for the state of West Virginia. And they invited me to come to their 2006 event. That was held in Pittsburgh, only about an hour and a half away. And at that time, one night they invited storytellers on stage. This was already planned ahead of, and I was one of the 8 storytellers that was presenting on stage that night to a crowd of like 800 or 1,000 people. The national storytelling event was very, very popular. Storytellers came together from all over the United States. So anyways, again, I told 2 stories: the story of Yudhisthira and the dog, and also I told the story of Dronacharya and how he sends out into the public. He sends out Yudhisthira to find someone who is better than him, and he sends out Duryodhana to find someone who's lower than him. And neither one of them could accomplish their task. Yudhisthira thought, well, I'm the lowest. I can't find anybody lower than me. And Duryodhana said, well, I'm the best. I can't find anybody better than me.